Since this is MLK Day weekend, and happy MLK Day weekend to you all, I will open with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Ware Lecture, which was delivered in 1966 at the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly, our annual gathering of UUs far and wide. Dr. King said to us in 1966, "All I'm saying is this, that all life is interrelated, and somehow we are all tied together. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be." This is the interrelated structure of reality. John Donne, he continues, caught it years ago and placed it in graphic terms. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. He goes on to say, any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind. Therefore send not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And Dr. King concludes, this realization is absolutely necessary if we are to remain awake in this revolution. So this month here at UUI, our worship theme is struggle and freedom. And when Dr. King spoke at General Assembly in 1966, we had already demonstrated ourselves as willing participants in the struggle for equal civil rights and against segregation. Indeed, more Unitarian Universalists proportionally answered Dr. King's call to go to Selma than any other denomination. Now, beyond that particular issue, Dr. King's vision of a beloved community, a community of radical welcome based on love of humanity, was and is deeply consonant with Unitarian Universalist values. And his theology of freedom, rooted as it is in interdependence, is our theology of freedom. With Dr. King, we recognize that because we are bound up together, I cannot be free until you are free. And so we are inspired by our ideals to stand in solidarity with all those who seek freedom and not to consider our work done until human flourishing is the hallmark of the social order everywhere. Dr. King recognized that we need to be free to be fully human, and we need one another to be fully human together. Now, in the Stone Soup story, we are given a picture of a community that has lost that sense of its need for one another. It is a community that has been fractured and frozen by fear and scarcity. Each person believes that they do not have enough, and rather than come together, they hole up individually. And in their fear, they are shut off from one another, and in their fear, they are shut off from their own humanity. And we know this because in the story, each villager fails at what is among the oldest and most universally recognized of ethical duties, which is the duty to welcome the stranger and to provide shelter and sustenance to the traveler, the wanderer, the immigrant. This ethical idea is planted deep in human culture. In the mythologies of the Mediterranean, we have many variations of stories where God disguises himself as a humble traveler and goes from door to door to see if the person within will greet them generously or not. And because it's a Greek myth, woe to you if you do not greet that God generously. But for those who do, their kindness and generosity is richly rewarded. In the Hebrew Scriptures, the injunction to welcome the stranger is repeated at least a dozen times. In Leviticus, we read, when a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall treat him as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In the New Testament, in the very well-known Matthew 25, Jesus teaches, I was a stranger and you invited me in. And when the disciples ask, when did we do this? He says, to the extent that you did it even to the least of people, you did it to me. And the same teaching appears throughout the Quran. It is embedded in the Quran. in the Vedas, in the Analects of Confucius, and so on. And of course, humanist ethical thinking also emphasizes kindness and generosity and reciprocity as key virtues for human flourishing. In this life, we will all take our turn being the wayfaring stranger and our turn being the welcoming host. This is our sacred obligation to one another. And in the Stone Soup folktale, the villagers have walled themselves off from this universal humane teaching until the traveling stranger essentially tricks them into recovering their better selves and stepping back into a space of collective possibility. Now, the Stone Soup story has been an annual tradition at UUI, so it's been told many times. And of course, one of the morals of the story is that we are all richer when we share together our various contributions, and that we all have something to give no matter how small. But today I want to approach the story from a different angle, and I want to ask the question, who is the most important person in the story for this Stone Soup magic to happen? And the obvious answer is sort of the traveler who sets up the pot and starts the fire and boils the water and concocts this whole Stone Soup charade. He has a vision and he has a plan that is going to get the community from scarcity to a place of sharing. But consider that moment in the story when he's first taking that sip and he says, "This soup is pretty good, but it would taste even better if it had some potato." And that's just kind of hanging in the air. And you can imagine the villagers are kind of not really making eye contact, thinking about, I don't really have a lot of potato, kind of hungry my own self, and everyone's sort of waiting to see who's going to do what. And finally the woman says, "I have something to give," and she steps up. And up until that moment when the first woman comes on board, the traveler's whole plan is fragile. It is liable to collapse into nothing. It is a dream, but it is not a reality. And she exhibits both generosity and trust. Generosity in that she who has so little gives what she can, and trust that the end result will be good, that others will join in, and that she will share in it. And this example of generosity and trust, her example, creates a space of hopefulness that the other villagers can step into that didn't exist before. And her reaction creates a ripple effect in the other observers, the result of which is greater than anything that she could have achieved with her small contribution that is available to her. Now, this idea, the first follower effect, was first discussed in a now famous, or at least internet famous, TED Talk by a guy named Derek Silvers. Derek Silvers was a sociologist who had watched this footage that someone had taken of an outdoor rock festival. And he observed that there was this guy off by himself in the middle of an open lawn, just kind of doing this really wacky dance. It's a bizarre dance. And he's just dancing by himself, and everyone's kind of sitting around staring at him. And as long as he's dancing by himself, he's just alone and centered. But eventually, another gentleman gets up and kind of wanders over and starts dancing with him. And now there's two of them, and they're still dancing together for about 15, 20 seconds, just the two of them. But then a third person says, "Oh yeah," and they join in. And once that happens, two more people come in, and then three very quickly, and then there's this cascade. And in the space of a little less than 3 minutes, there are hundreds of people covering the lawn, all dancing together, joyously, energetically, as a community. And in the book, Interfaith Leadership, Ibu Patel identifies the first follower principle as a very important tool in organizing movements. You need leaders to put forward a vision, but it is the first follower who gives that vision credibility and convert it into a reality. It is the first followers who teach others how to join in. In the Stone Soup story, the woman who is the first to offer up the contribution is teaching the others how to be generous, how to recognize their own potential contribution, understand that it matters no matter how small and to risk stepping forward. So being a first follower is actually a kind of leadership. And it is a very important kind of leadership, because when we are talking about the struggle for freedom, this is most often the kind of leadership that any of us will have the opportunity to exercise. Very few of us will be pioneering leaders when it comes to working for social change or working to correct or prevent some social injustice. But many of us can be first followers within our own community or within our own circle or our own family. And by making whatever contribution is available to us, however insignificant it may seem, we are actually being leaders. And we can, by our small action, demonstrate hope in the face of despair, action in the face of resignation, courage in the face of fear, decisiveness in the face of uncertainty, trust in the face of cynicism, generosity in the face of want. And the ripple effects of this demonstration can be profound. Now, with that in mind, I want to share a different story today. This is a story whose ending has not yet been written, and it's from the January 8th Indianapolis Star by a woman named Fatima Hussein. And the story is entitled, Trump's TPS Move Has Salvadoran Hoosiers Bracing for Deportations. This is the story. Elmer Pena wonders what is going to happen to his house, his car, and his belongings should he and his American-born children be forced to leave the United States. The East Side homeowner, who has worked in warehousing for the past 18 years, now faces the prospect of expulsion from the country he has lived in longer than he has lived in his native El Salvador. The Department of Homeland Security announced the end of the temporary protected status designation for El Salvador. So Mr. Pena, 38, is one of roughly 200,000 Salvadorans who have been living in the United States legally under this program for nearly 2 decades. And President Trump's administration set a September 2019 deadline for those immigrants to leave or face deportation. I feel bad because I haven't done anything wrong, Pena said. I haven't hurt anyone. I pay my taxes. Now I'm being treated like I'm not part of this country. Pena worries about how his 3 children, 2 boys, 10 and 8, and a 6-year-old girl would fare in a country they have never visited. But Pena said if he is ordered to leave, he has no choice but to bring his children, who are American-born citizens. Not even a dog would leave their babies behind, he says. El Salvador's embassy in Washington estimates that 97% of Salvadorans in the program are over age 24, are employed, pay taxes. More than half own their own homes. They have also given birth to 192,000 children, all U.S. citizens, according to the Center for Migration Studies. The Pena family's pastor, Katie Moran, said the family's options appear grim. They can either leave voluntarily or stay without documents, said the member of the Indianapolis Congregation Action Network. It's incredibly difficult to see. So that is the story whose ending has not been written. The Trump administration is already working on a sequel targeting 437,000 people from 10 countries overall, people who were invited to stay due to extraordinary hardships in their home country, people who built up lives and families under the protection of the American flag, people whose lives and families will now be uprooted as they are unceremoniously kicked out. Haiti is one of those countries on the list. 58,700 Haitians face forced removal from our country. Add to this story 800,000 DACA children, the so-called dreamers, young adults brought to this country as undocumented children through no fault or agency of their own, who have never known any other home, who are under threat of being sent away from everything they hold dear. Add to this millions more decent, peaceful, productive community members, people who came to this country fleeing violence or seeking a better life for their children or looking to provide for alien and indigent family members back home. These are people we wish to see arrested, detained, separated from their partners and children, and shipped away. These are people we wish to see living in fear, living in hiding, living from day to day, living without hope. Or so the story goes. In the case of the El Salvadorans, the Haitians, and the other people here under temporary protected status, the rationale for deportation is that since whatever conditions caused the status to be granted have been deemed repaired, these 437,000 people should go home. The reality is that these are our neighbors. They are law-abiding, productive citizens who are community members who have, over the course of a decade, become part of the fabric of this country and of their communities. The reality is that because of this policy, American children will be uprooted and driven out of their homeland. The reality is immigrants as a population commit less crime than the general population. Economists identify immigrants as risk takers who are responsible for a large proportion of new business startups. They are job creators and wealth creators. So it's fair to ask, what social good would justify uprooting 500,000 productive community members and their children? And unfortunately, and it deeply pains me to say this, and I say this understanding the gravity of what I am saying, it is now clear, it is incredibly clear, that racism is playing no small role in driving our immigration policy. I will beg your forgiveness for repeating in this space the President's on-the-record campaign statement that Mexican immigrants are murderers and rapists. His credibly reported statement from the past June that Nigerians live in mud huts, that Haitians have AIDS, and his too vile to be repeated statements about those countries that we are all aware of he made just days ago regarding the African nations. For the record, African immigrants to the United States have the highest level of education attainment of any immigrant population. But that is utterly beside the point. These statements shock the conscience, and they have consequences. The President has reportedly insisted that Haitians in America be granted no relief from deportation. He wants them gone, along with the rest of 437,000 people and their children from those countries, none of which look like Norway. This is a story that already impacts our city and our communities. There are community members living in fear because of this story. But soon we all could become more intimately a part of it, more intimately witness to it. The machinery by which this administration intends to ramp up the removal of immigrants from our country, documented and undocumented, could soon have a prominent foothold in our state. The South Bend Tribune reported in December of last year that a for-profit company called Core Civic is petitioning to build a $100 million immigrant detention center in Elkhart, Indiana, to hold up to 1,100 mostly black and brown people who will be swept up by ICE agents and placed there. We will have a ringside seat to the uprooting of lives, the dismemberment of families, and the disappearing of immigrant community members behind concrete walls. When we talk about struggle and freedom, this is not an abstraction. Racism is real, and the devastating effects of racism are real, and they are playing out in our national policy right now. And this is all happening on our watch. If you do not like the story I've been telling you, if you want that story to have a different ending than the one that is currently being written, I would like to direct your attention to one of the most powerful leaders I know when you talk about visionaries. Sister Tracy Huron is a community leader with IndyCan, which is now called Faith in Indiana. And she is one of the most tireless advocates for justice that I have ever had the privilege to know and work with. She has received national recognition for her anti-poverty work. She is regularly profiled in the Indy Star for her crusade to protect immigrants and advocate for a more just and humane immigration policy. UUI is a member of IndyCan, now called Faith in Indiana. which means that we have the opportunity to work with Sister Tracy and many other amazing community leaders. We are currently recruiting people to our IndyCan team here at UUI, which will meet regularly with trained Faith in Indiana leaders to coordinate work with them. Please let me know if you would like to be a part of this team. But whether you are on the team or not, please know there will be many opportunities in the months ahead to contribute in some small or large way to this work. Take what little you have and add it to that pot. Very few of us can be leaders. I am not Sister Tracy Barano. But many of us can be first followers in our community, or in our social circle, or in our family. We have no way of knowing what ripple effects our own small contribution may make. But we know that these ripple effects are real too, and powerful. We know that the love that lives in us and through us is real and powerful. In our reading today, Bishop Untenor writes in honor of Father Oscar Romero, the man who fought for the poor in El Salvador and was killed for doing that work. And in his prayer he says, "This is what we are about. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that this enables us to do something. In the struggle for freedom for all people, may we recognize the contribution that we ourselves are able to make, however small it may be. It may be an action, it may be an idea, it may be a few words, it may be a vote or a donation, it may just be showing up somewhere when someone is needed to show up. Whatever we have to give, may we have the wisdom to see that opportunity when it opens up before us, and may we have the courage and conviction to step into it. Cornel West says, "Justice is what love looks like in public. Justice is what love looks like in public." Let us have faith in the power of that love inside of us. Let us make it public, and may the ripple effects of that love spread far and wide, bringing comfort and courage to everyone it reaches, bringing inspiration even to distant shores, bringing hope to those for whom hope is hard to find. May it be so. Amen. Would you please rise in body and spirit? Our closing hymn today is "Come Sing a Song with Me."